Hi there, welcome. If you're like most people and you care about your health and fitness, but you find that going to the gym is a bit of a chore or struggle to maintain, then in this video I'm going to give you two really good alternatives to going to the gym that will give you the same or even better benefits. The main criteria by which I selected these specific activities are that 1. I have personal experience doing them, 2. There's an inherent sense of motivation and progression within these activities, and 3. They both have novelty baked into the activity. I have nothing against going to the gym personally. In fact, I actually think it's a very good complementary form of exercise or activity that boosts whatever else is your primary form of fitness. But there's no denying that the gym itself is quite repetitive, regardless of what machines or equipment that you tend to use. There are of course certain types of people who seem inherently motivated to go to the gym, but typically these people have already reached a certain level of fitness, so it kind of takes care of itself and the momentum is there and it's easier to keep going. For most beginners though, there's a certain level of discipline that you need to either get started or to persevere through the difficulty that particularly comes when starting out. There's no denying though, and all the research backs this up, that exercise and fitness is one of the main things that correlates with long-term health and even just longevity by itself. What this really means is that if you want to live a long and healthy life, there's no real alternative to exercise, so you need to find some way of getting it, even if it's not exactly the gym. So this brings me to the first of my recommendations, which is climbing, or more specifically, bouldering. Traditional rope climbing works very well also, but there is a higher barrier to entry because you need to know how to operate the equipment, and in most cases, you need to have a partner to be able to take care of your health and safety while you're doing it. Bouldering though doesn't have this overhead, and instead you can focus on just getting to the climbing aspect, but it doesn't compromise on the challenge, the difficulty and the benefits. Both bouldering and rope climbing started off as traditional outdoor activities, but because of the rise in popularity, there's been a surge in the number of indoor climbing gyms that have been opened. This means that you'll be able to benefit from doing the activity regardless of the weather conditions and in a more safe and nurturing environment. So one of the main aspects of bouldering is that you don't need ropes, and the reason for this is because the actual climb itself doesn't go as high as rope climbing does, which means you can just climb and back down whenever you reach the top, or even if you didn't make it, without having to worry about whether you're going to fall or injure yourself. Now, like any activity, injury is still possible, but if you do things in a careful and safe manner, the risk of injury is drastically lowered. Now I should point out that I've only been climbing less than a year, but because I've been climbing fairly regularly, there's already a noticeable progression since I've started. Since progression is one of the key reasons why I recommend this activity, let me explain how the progression system works. So there are different systems that exist across the world in order to be able to grade a particular route, but one of the most common, and in my opinion the most intuitive, is the V rating system. How this works is that the people who set the routes in a particular gym assign a particular grade to that route based on its difficulty. This difficulty typically ranges from V0 to V8+, where V0 is a very simple, almost ladder-like climb, and V8 you're dealing with really challenging climbs where the grips are very uncomfortable, you have to position yourself in a very specific way, and almost everyone who climbs won't be able to reach this level for at least a few years. Now technically the V system does go higher than this, and it can go to V16 or potentially even above, where V16 would be one of the most difficult routes in the entire world and is usually reserved for the most professional and distinguished climbers. But most people won't have to worry about this, so dealing with the range from V0 to V8 will take care of 99% of climbers at least. So here's some footage of me attempting a V0 in my local gym, and as you can see, the particular grips and holds are quite reasonable, there's nothing particularly challenging about the route to the top, and the specific skills required to get there is quite minimal, including the psychological side of climbing, which tends to come into things as you start off. Here are some more difficult climbs where we're looking at a particular route which is a V1, and then moving on to a V2, which again is even more challenging because the grips now become more difficult. There's less room for your fingers, so you really have to build up that strength in your fingers to be able to support your weight as you ascend that particular climb. Now different boulders will have different challenges, so some will require increased finger strength, others will require good balance, some will benefit from flexibility, and some are particularly challenging from a psychological perspective because the climb itself isn't particularly difficult, but you need to be able to either take almost a slight leap of faith or you might need to reach out with one hand at something that might not seem natural or comfortable to you at the time. The variety in bouldering is one of its key strengths, so most gyms will either have a huge number of particular boulders or tasks to try and complete, and you can spend several days or weeks trying to complete that task. And in most gyms, they will replace these particular routes on a semi-regular basis so that there's always something fresh and interesting and new to tackle. The last really nice thing about climbing is there's a real kind of community and friendly spirit that exists within most climbing communities. So whether you're new and you're starting out, or if you're a seasoned climber, there's usually a lot of people who are very friendly, willing to engage, chat, help each other out, and often there are particular courses, classes for people who either want to up their game or to learn it from scratch. Many climbing gyms even have events or classes specific to women and specific to kids. So there's no real demographic or age range that you will struggle with, because climbing is one of those things that everyone can benefit from and everyone can learn. All in all, climbing is a really good form of exercise because it builds up strength in your muscles, strength in your joints, it's really good for cardio, and it's great for flexibility too. So moving on to number 2, and this is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This particular activity shares a few of the benefits with climbing, but also offers some new ones as well. If you're new to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or even if you haven't heard of it and you decide to look up some videos, you might find that initially it's quite either confusing or it even might look a little bit intense. But trust me when I say this is just a side effect of looking at it without an experienced eye or perspective. For context, if you look how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was started, it might reassure you about some of the things that you can expect and some of the things that's involved from a physical perspective. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was founded by someone called Helio Gracie in Brazil, and his older brothers who were taking part in judo at the time were much more strong and physically capable than he was. Since Helio was a lot more frail and he wasn't able to take part in the judo sessions that his brothers were, he tried to observe and adapt that particular art into something that he could do. Over time, he took some of the main aspects and ideas of judo, made them his own, and made them work regardless of strength or size. Instead, they would work based on leverage, biomechanics, and basic physics. Jiu-Jitsu, after all, translates from Japanese as the gentle art. So if you're worried about not being fit enough or not being strong enough, then you shouldn't worry, because Jiu-Jitsu is not built for these types of people. The idea of Jiu-Jitsu is that you make the best use of your body, your size, and your own personal assets to be able to defeat your opponent. Because Jiu-Jitsu is also a form of martial art, it has many benefits, not just in terms of health, fitness, and exercise, but also self-defense. While Jiu-Jitsu was founded in Brazil, what really caused it to take off and surge in popularity was the first ever UFC MMA tournament. Here, people from across the world and coming from different martial arts disciplines would compete against one another to try and decide which martial art is the most effective. So you'd have many distinguished practitioners from different martial arts such as karate, taekwondo, and even kickboxing, and they would all come together until one would be crowned the victor. The most surprising outcome from this whole event is that the person who won it was not a really big and buff boxer or kickboxer. Instead, the winner was a relatively short guy from Brazil practicing a form of grappling, which is now known as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Since Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a grappling martial art, when you're training, there's actually no striking allowed. Instead, you learn to use your opponent's strength against them and to be able to use the strengths of your body against the weaknesses of theirs. So the most common way to win in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is through what is called a submission. This is when you get your opponent into typically a joint lock or a chokehold, and they are forced to tap out before any damage is done. I think one of the things to note for a beginner is that typically on your first session, you might try to observe patiently, but when you get involved in the particular spar or duel with someone, often beginners burn through a lot of energy because a lot of these positions and scenarios are so alien to them that their body reacts as if it's flight or fight. Instead, the more experienced you go, the more Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu adheres to its own name, which is the gentle art. Like many martial arts, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has a ranking system based on the color of your belt. The good news though is the ranking system is very simple, and it starts off as white belt and then you move to blue, purple, brown, and eventually black. One of the main differences between Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu's ranking system and the ranking system of other martial arts is that you don't get your belt based on the amount of time you've been there. you get it based on merit. So when you move from one belt to the next, such as purple to brown, you will only get that brown belt when you're genuinely good enough to be a brown belt, and you're able to reliably prove that you're more competent at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu than all other belts below you. What this means is that you might not get promoted very often, but when you do, there's a real sense of satisfaction and fulfillment because you know you've earned it. So here I'm going to list out a bunch of the benefits of both climbing and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and as you can see, this should give you plenty of reasons why you should at least try one of them. Just to point out that one of the shared traits of both of these things is grip strength. It massively increases your grip strength, which turns out to actually be one of the big correlators with long-term health span. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this kind of content, then feel free to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.